Why is it that the harder you try to make someone like you, the faster that person loses interest? If you have ever stared at your phone, waiting for a reply that took too long, if you have written and deleted a message 15 times trying to make it sound perfect, if you felt like your entire mood depended on whether that person texted you or not, stay right where you are, because what I am about to explain over the next few minutes is going to completely dismantle the way you have been understanding desire, attraction, and your own worth. I am not going to give you magic phrases or manual tricks. I am going to explain the real psychological mechanism that makes some people irresistible without even trying, while others, working far harder, end up forgotten with devastating ease. And I want to be honest with you from the very first minute. Some of what I am about to say is going to feel uncomfortable, maybe even a little confronting. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is usually a sign that we are getting close to something true. Let us start with something that will probably be painful to hear, but that you need to understand as soon as possible. Every time you chase, every time you insist, every time you need a sign of approval to feel at ease, you are sending a silent message, one that no words can hide. That message says, without you ever saying it out loud, that your well-being depends on someone else's decision. And human beings instinctively pull away from what they perceive as needy in exactly the same way they pull away from danger. This is not a moral judgment. It is not a way of saying that wanting connection is weak or that caring about someone makes you pathetic. Wanting connection is one of the most human things there is. The problem was never the wanting. The problem is what happens when that wanting turns into a kind of quiet desperation that leaks out through every message, every glance at the phone, every reorganized plan. People can feel that leak even when they cannot name it. And once they feel it, something in them almost automatically starts to step back. Carl Gustav Jung spoke of the shadow, that part of ourselves we would rather not look at, those traits we consider undesirable and therefore repress or deny. When a man has not made peace with his own shadow, when he carries insecurities he has never confronted directly, those insecurities inevitably seep into how he relates to others, especially in romantic matters. The anxiety of not being enough, the constant need for external confirmation, does not come from the woman standing in front of him. It comes from a much older wound that simply found in her a place to surface. Think about that for a second, because it is easy to skim past. The wound was already there. The relationship did not create it. What the relationship did was shine a light on it, the way a dark room reveals its shape only once you turn on a lamp. If you do not understand this, you will spend years blaming circumstances, blaming timing, blaming the specific person, when the actual pattern will keep repeating itself with someone new, in a different city, wearing a different face, saying different words, but producing the exact same result. Here is the first great truth I want to make clear before we go any further. No one can fill a void that is not theirs to fill. No person, however special, can become the permanent source of your self-worth without that relationship eventually collapsing under the weight of that impossible expectation. It is not that she does not want to help you feel whole. It is that no human being was ever built to carry that weight for another human being, not even in the healthiest, most loving relationship imaginable. Expecting someone else to complete you is not romantic. It is a setup for resentment on both sides, because eventually she will feel the pressure of being responsible for your entire emotional world, and you will feel the panic of watching your only source of stability behave like an actual human being with her own moods, her own bad days, her own need for space. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote something especially relevant here. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. This line, though born in a completely different context, applies directly to what we are discussing. A man with a clear purpose, with projects that matter to him, with a defined direction in life, does not need one specific relationship to work out in order to feel that his existence has meaning. And precisely because of that, paradoxically, he becomes far more attractive, because he is not asking for anything. He is simply sharing a life that is already full on its own. Think about the difference between two types of men. The first organizes his entire week around whether she replies or not, checks his phone compulsively, cancels his own plans hoping to be available just in case she decides to write. The second has his own routine, his own goals, his own friendships, and although he feels genuine interest, that interest does not reorganize his entire existence. Which of the two do you think comes across as more magnetic? The answer, however counterintuitive it may seem, is obvious to anyone who has paid close attention to human dynamics. Now I want to pause on something crucial, because I do not want you to misread what I am explaining. This is not about faking disinterest as a calculated strategy, about pretending to be busy to seem more desirable, about applying tactics learned from some video that promised guaranteed results. That is manipulation dressed up as wisdom, and people, even if they cannot always explain why, end up sensing that falseness. What we are describing here is something entirely different. Building a genuinely solid life so that the stability you project is not a performance, but a real reflection of who you are. There is a very specific reason fake strategies eventually fail, even when they seem to work at first. Human beings are extraordinarily good at detecting incongruence, even at an unconscious level. You can say all the right things, follow all the right scripts, wait exactly the recommended number of hours before replying, and still come across as hollow, because underneath the performance, the anxiety is still there, still leaking out in your tone, in your body language, in the subtle urgency behind supposedly casual words. Strategy without inner change is just a more sophisticated costume for the same insecurity. Sooner or later, the costume slips. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the concentration camps and the creator of logotherapy, held that human beings need to find their own sense of meaning independent of external circumstances in order to sustain themselves psychologically, even under the harshest conditions. If he was able to find reasons to keep going in the middle of absolute horror, it is fairly obvious that any of us can find reasons not to be completely emotionally dependent on whether someone replies to a text on time. I want you to sit with that comparison for a moment, not to minimize what you are feeling, but to put it into perspective. Frankl watched people around him die daily, lost almost everyone he loved, and still managed to construct an entire philosophy around the idea that meaning can be found or created in nearly any circumstance. That does not mean your pain over unanswered messages is trivial. It means the tools that helped him survive the most extreme suffering imaginable are the exact same tools available to you right now, on a much smaller but very real scale. The capacity to locate meaning somewhere other than in the hands of someone who may or may not text you back. Now I want to tell you about something almost no one has explained to you clearly, the role of silence in building desire. There is a widespread belief that maintaining constant presence, texting frequently, always being available, is the right way to keep another person's interest alive. And yet, exactly the opposite happens. When you fill every possible space with messages, with questions, with attempts to keep the conversation going, you give the other person no moment in which to miss you, because you never truly become absent. Think about how memory actually works. You do not build strong memories of things that are constantly present in front of you. You build strong memories of things that appear, disappear, and then return. A song you hear once and cannot get out of your head works differently than a song playing on a loop in the background of your entire day, which eventually becomes wallpaper, something your brain filters out precisely because it never stops. Presence without rhythm, without variation, without space, loses its impact. The mind needs contrast to register significance. Søren Kierkegaard reflected extensively on this paradox of desire. Whatever is always available gradually loses its ability to generate longing. Desire needs distance to breathe, needs space so the mind can voluntarily return to something instead of feeling constantly pushed toward it from the outside. This does not mean silence should be used as punishment, as a tool to provoke anxiety in the other person, nor as a cold strategy to seem more interesting than you really are. The silence we are talking about arises naturally when you have a life full of things that genuinely matter to you. You do not reply right away because you are training, because you are working on a project, because you are out with friends, because your existence already has enough content of its own that a pending conversation does not become the absolute center of your attention. There is an important distinction hiding inside this idea, one that deserves to be spelled out clearly instead of left implied. Strategic silence, the kind meant to manipulate someone into chasing you, comes from a place of control. It is still, underneath, an attempt to manage the other person's emotions in order to produce a specific reaction. Natural silence, the kind we are actually describing, comes from a place of living. You are not silent because you are trying to make her wonder where you are. You are silent because you are genuinely absorbed in something else, and the wondering is simply a side effect of you having an actual life, not the goal of some elaborate plan. James Hollis, a contemporary Jungian psychologist, wrote that much of human suffering comes from trying to make another person carry the responsibility of healing wounds that actually belong only to us. When you let someone else's silence throw you into panic, when you interpret every delay as impending rejection, you are not reacting to the present situation. You are reacting to a much older pattern, probably formed during early experiences in your life where abandonment or rejection left a mark you still have not fully processed. Hollis also makes a point that I think deserves special attention here. Much of what we call falling in love in its early and most intense stage is actually the unconscious hope that someone else will finally do for us what we could not do for ourselves as children. We look for a parent we never fully had, a sense of safety we never quite felt, a stability that was missing at some formative point. And because that hope is unconscious, we rarely recognize it for what it is. We simply feel an inexplicable pull towards someone, a pull we describe as chemistry or connection, without realizing that part of what we are responding to is an old story trying to find a different ending. Now I want to introduce a concept I find fundamental, and that is rarely explained with the depth it deserves. Mystery as a form of respect for the natural process of getting to know someone. We live in an era where immediacy dominates absolutely everything. Everything gets shared right away. An entire life story, traumas, goals, insecurities, as if intimacy could be sped up simply by handing over more information faster. But genuine intimacy does not work that way. Intimacy is built progressively, layer upon layer. And when you hand over absolutely everything at once, you eliminate the very process that makes getting to know someone fascinating. Consider how this plays out practically. On a first or second meeting, a man overwhelmed by anxiety often feels an urge to explain himself completely. His childhood, his last relationship, why it ended, his fears about commitment, his hopes for the future, sometimes even his therapy sessions in painstaking detail. Each individual piece of information might be true and even relevant eventually, but delivered all at once, in a rush, it does not read as openness. It reads as a person handing someone a finished puzzle instead of letting them assemble the pieces themselves. There is no discovery left to make, and discovery, it turns out, is one of the primary engines of attraction. Carl Jung also spoke about this, though from another angle, when he described the process of individuation as a long, gradual path that cannot be rushed without losing its value. In the same way, revealing yourself completely to another person within the first few weeks, telling them every trauma, every insecurity, every expectation for the future, does not create instant closeness the way many assume. It creates saturation because you strip the other person of the chance to discover you for themselves at their own pace. This does not mean you should hide relevant information or build a false version of yourself to seem artificially mysterious. Authentic mystery is not concealment. It is simply allowing things to be revealed over time, naturally, without the urgency to prove your worth immediately through overexposure. Marcus Aurelius, in his personal meditations, constantly stressed the importance of self-control, the ability to observe your own impulses without being automatically swept along by them. Applied to what we are discussing, self-control means noticing the impulse to write again, to seek an immediate explanation for the silence, to need to resolve the uncertainty as soon as possible, and consciously choosing not to act on that impulse, but from a calmer, more considered decision. There is a small but powerful practice hidden inside this Stoic idea, one you can actually use the next time your phone stays quiet longer than you would like. Instead of immediately reaching for your phone to draft another message, try naming, silently, exactly what you are feeling. Not "she does not like me anymore," which is an interpretation dressed up as a fact, but simply, "I feel anxious right now." That small shift from interpretation to observation is often enough to interrupt the automatic chain reaction that would otherwise end with you sending a message you will regret 20 minutes later. Seneca, in his letters, wrote that nothing is as destructive to inner peace as depending on what is not within our control. And another person's response, their timing, their decisions, will never be within your control, no matter how hard you try to influence them. Accepting this deeply, not as bitter resignation, but as a liberating truth, is probably one of the most important steps toward genuine emotional stability. It is worth pointing out how radical this idea actually is once you take it seriously. Most of us go through life quietly believing that if we just say the right thing, do the right gesture, wait the right amount of time, we can guarantee a specific outcome from another person. Stoic philosophy essentially says, no, you cannot. And trying to will only make you miserable. What you can control is your own effort, your own integrity, your own reactions. Everything else, including whether someone chooses you, was never yours to control in the first place. This is not defeatism. It is actually the opposite. It is the recognition that your peace does not have to wait for someone else's decision. Now I want to talk about something that seems contradictory on the surface, but really is not. Desiring someone deeply while, at the same time, not needing them. Erich Fromm drew this distinction with extraordinary clarity. Mature desire is born from fullness, not from lack. You can deeply want to share your life with someone, feel genuine attraction, thoroughly enjoy their company, and still keep your identity, your projects, your ability to be okay intact, regardless of the outcome of that specific relationship. Need, on the other hand, is born from emptiness and looks for something in the other person that, in reality, only you can provide for yourself. Inner security, a sense of self-worth, emotional stability. Fromm went further than most people realize on this topic. He argued that in a society built around consumption, we have come to treat love itself as something to acquire, something to obtain, almost like a product that will finally satisfy us if we just find the right one. This consumer mindset toward love turns the other person into an object meant to solve a problem inside us, rather than a whole human being to be known and appreciated on their own terms. When you approach dating from that mindset, even without realizing it, you are essentially shopping for a solution to your own emptiness. And people, again, tend to sense being treated as a solution rather than as a person, and it pushes them away. When you confuse desire with need, you end up behaving in ways that, without realizing it, push away the very thing you are trying to pull closer. You text too often. You ask for constant reassurance that everything is fine. You show anxiety at any ambiguous sign. And all of that behavior, even if it comes from an understandable place, communicates exactly the opposite of what you want to convey. I also want to pause on something uncomfortable but absolutely necessary to mention: reciprocity. Nothing we have discussed so far makes any sense if applied to a relationship where there is no equivalent interest from the other side. Emotional stability, self-control, the patient building of connection, all of this works when both people are genuinely interested in getting to know each other. It does not work and should never be used as a strategy to force interest where there simply is not any. This point deserves more attention than it usually gets because there is a real risk in everything we have discussed so far. Taking the idea of patience and stability and twisting it into an excuse to endure disrespect, inconsistency, or outright disinterest indefinitely. Patience is a virtue when it is applied to something that is actually developing, even slowly. Patience becomes self-abandonment when it is applied to something that simply is not there. Learning the difference between these two situations is, arguably, one of the most valuable skills a person can develop romantically and otherwise. Abraham Maslow placed belonging and love among the fundamental needs in his hierarchy, but he also warned that these needs can only be met in a healthy way when there is a genuine exchange, not a one-sided pursuit disguised as patience. If you invest time, energy, and attention in someone who consistently shows disinterest, no amount of self-control or emotional stability is going to turn that situation into something healthy. Wisdom does not just mean not chasing. It also means recognizing when to walk away entirely. Recognizing that moment is not always obvious, especially because inconsistency itself can be intoxicating. A person who is warm one day and distant the next creates a kind of intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. You never quite know when the next reward is coming, so you keep pulling the lever, hoping this time will be the good one. If you notice that pattern in a connection you are pursuing, unpredictable warmth followed by unpredictable distance, it is worth asking honestly whether you are staying because there is real potential or because the uncertainty itself has become the hook. Now I want to talk about something rarely mentioned in these kinds of conversations: the direct relationship between personal purpose and natural magnetism. When you look at the people who genuinely interest you, not just romantically, but in general, you will almost always find a common pattern. They have something that drives them beyond external approval. A project, a passion, a clear direction they pursue, regardless of who is watching or not. That energy, the energy of someone building something of their own, is attractive in a way no calculated gesture could ever replicate. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, not in the vulgar sense of dominating others, but in the sense of the creative force that drives a human being to expand, to create, to become more than they were before. A man who channels that energy into his own projects, into his own growth, radiates a vitality that is perceptible, even without words. And that vitality, that sense that there is something alive and moving behind this person, generates a kind of attraction far more lasting than any learned conversational technique. It is worth being specific about what this actually looks like in practice, because having purpose can sound abstract to the point of being useless as advice. Purpose does not require a grand life mission announced to the world. It can be as concrete as training consistently toward a specific physical goal, learning a skill you have always wanted to learn, building something at work you are genuinely proud of, showing up reliably for a small group of friends who matter to you, or simply having a few hours each week dedicated to something that has nothing to do with impressing anyone. What matters is not the scale of the project. What matters is that it is yours, that it exists independently of any relationship, and that engaging with it makes you feel more like yourself rather than less. This brings us to a question I want you to ask yourself with complete honesty. If you completely remove the possibility of that specific relationship working out, would your life still have meaning? Would you have somewhere to direct your energy, your mornings, your free time? If the answer leaves you feeling empty, if you struggle to imagine your week without that person at the center of it, that is exactly the work you need to do before worrying about anything else related to attraction or seduction. I also want to talk about the role childhood plays in all of this, because understanding the origin helps enormously in deactivating the automatic reaction. James Hollis explains that many of the patterns we repeat in adulthood, especially in romantic matters, have their roots in early experiences where we implicitly learned that love had to be earned, that the attention of the important figures in our life was conditional, dependent on behaving a certain way or meeting certain expectations. If, as a child, you experienced affection as inconsistent, sometimes available and sometimes not, for no clear reason, you have likely developed, as an adult, a particular hypervigilance toward any sign of possible emotional withdrawal. This would explain why a simple few hours of silence can trigger disproportionate anxiety, an anxiety that does not actually belong entirely to the present situation, but to a pattern formed long ago. This connects closely to what attachment researchers have described in adult relationships, even though we are not going to get lost in clinical categories here. What matters practically is this. Some people learned early on that closeness was safe and reliable, and they tend to move through relationships with a certain baseline calm. Others learned that closeness could disappear without warning, and they tend to carry a low hum of vigilance into every connection, waiting, almost against their will, for the other shoe to drop. Neither pattern is a life sentence. Both can shift with awareness and, often, with deliberate practice over time. But pretending the pattern does not exist, or trying to reason your way out of it purely through logic, rarely works, because the reaction lives somewhere deeper than logic, in old, well-worn neural pathways formed long before you had the words to describe what was happening to you. Recognizing this does not automatically solve the problem, but it opens a fundamental door, the possibility of responding from reflection instead of reacting from automatism. The next time you feel that urgent impulse to write again, to look for an immediate explanation, to need to resolve the uncertainty right away, you can pause and ask yourself whether that urgency truly belongs to the current situation or whether you are reliving something much older. There is a simple, but often overlooked tool here, worth mentioning. Naming the pattern out loud, even just to yourself, tends to loosen its grip. Saying, internally, "This is the old fear again, not necessarily the truth of what is happening right now," creates just enough distance between you and the feeling for a different response to become possible. This is not about suppressing the emotion or pretending it is not real. It is about not letting a feeling from 20 years ago make decisions for the person you are today. Now I want to bring all of this together into something actionable, because theory without action has fairly limited value. The first fundamental point is building a life that has meaning independent of any specific relationship. This means having your own projects, goals that genuinely excite you, solid friendships, activities you enjoy for their own sake, rather than as filler while you wait for a reply. This foundation is not optional. It is the ground everything else stands on. Start small if you need to. It does not have to be dramatic. A single hour a week dedicated to something entirely your own is a real beginning, and real beginnings compound over time in ways that are easy to underestimate at the start. The second point is training your ability to tolerate uncertainty without needing to resolve it immediately. Every time you feel the anxious urge to write again, practice the pause. This is not about deliberately ignoring the other person as a strategy, but about responding from calm instead of responding from urgency. One practical way to build this muscle is to simply delay on purpose by a small, manageable amount. Not days, not some artificial waiting period designed to send a message, just enough time, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes a few hours, for the initial wave of anxiety to pass so that whatever you eventually send comes from a settled place rather than a reactive one. The third point is letting things develop at their own pace without forcing levels of intimacy that enough time has not yet earned. Share gradually. Let the other person's curiosity stay active instead of handing over your entire personal history in the first deep conversation you have. This also means resisting the urge to define the relationship prematurely, to demand labels or guarantees before there has been enough shared experience to justify them. Let the relationship earn its own name over time rather than trying to force a name onto something still in the process of becoming itself. The fourth point is honestly evaluating reciprocity. Pay genuine attention to whether the other person shows equivalent interest, whether they invest similar time and energy, whether their actions confirm what they say. If that reciprocity does not exist, no amount of patience or self-control is going to build something healthy. In that case, wisdom lies in walking away with dignity, not in insisting and hoping things will change. This evaluation works best when it is honest rather than hopeful. It is easy to construct elaborate justifications for someone's inconsistent behavior when you want the outcome badly enough. A useful habit is to imagine a friend describing the exact same situation to you, word for word, and asking yourself what you would honestly tell them. The fifth point, perhaps the most important of all, is working directly on your relationship with yourself. No external technique, no communication strategy, no advice about what to say or when to say it is going to make up for a deficient relationship with your own sense of worth. That is the foundation of everything else, and without it, anything else you try to build will rest on fragile ground. This fifth point is worth expanding on because it is the one most people skip in favor of the more tactical advice. Working on your relationship with yourself is not an abstract, vague pursuit. It has concrete components. It means noticing how you talk to yourself when things do not go the way you hoped and gradually replacing harsh, punishing self-talk with something closer to how you would speak to a friend going through the same thing. It means keeping promises to yourself the same way you would want to keep them to someone else because self-trust is built the exact same way trust with another person is built, through small, repeated, consistent actions over time. It means tolerating the discomfort of not having all the answers about where a connection is headed without needing to numb that discomfort through constant reassurance seeking. I want to close with something I consider essential. We are not talking about becoming someone cold, distant, calculating who plays with other people's emotions to produce a desired effect. That would simply be replacing one form of immaturity with another. We are talking about something much deeper. Becoming a man whose emotional stability does not depend on external factors he cannot control, whose self-worth is built on his own achievements rather than on outside validation, whose capacity to love another person comes from abundance rather than from lack. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we have power over our mind, not over outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Applied to what we have talked about today, this means you have no control over whether that person replies quickly or slowly, over whether they eventually become as interested as you are, over the final outcome of any connection you are trying to build. The only thing you truly control is the quality of the person you become in the meantime, whether you keep investing in yourself, whether you keep your word, whether you act with consistency, whether you are able to sustain your own well-being, regardless of factors that are not up to you. It is worth remembering, too, that this work is not linear. You will not move in a straight line from anxious to secure. There will be days when the old pattern reasserts itself, when you check the phone one time too many, when you send the message you told yourself you would wait on. That is not failure. That is simply what growth looks like in real life, messier and less consistent than it sounds in a video like this one. What matters is not perfect execution. What matters is the general direction you are moving in over months and years, not the outcome of any single afternoon of waiting for a reply. So, the question I want to leave you with is not what you can say or do to make someone interested in you long term. The right question is different. Are you building a life worth living regardless of that specific relationship? Does your self-worth depend on factors you can control or on someone else's decision? Are you acting from abundance or from the fear of ending up with nothing? These questions will not be answered in a single day, and you will probably need to come back to them again and again as you move through this process. But every time you choose to respond from calm instead of urgency, every time you prioritize your own growth over chasing outside approval, every time you hold on to your identity instead of dissolving it to please someone, you will be building exactly the kind of stability that, without you even aiming for it directly, turns out to be deeply attractive. And now the decision, as always, is entirely in your hands. Are you going to keep organizing your peace of mind around decisions you do not control, or are you going to start building, quietly and consistently, the kind of life and character that no longer needs to chase anything because it already has enough worth of its own simply to be chosen? If this video resonated with you, if you recognized any of your own patterns in something we talked about today, leave a comment below. I would love to read your experience and reply to you personally. And if you feel this could help someone else, consider sharing it and subscribing so we can keep building this path together.